All right, welcome again to the Museum of Aquarium and Pet History. We are at SuperZoo once again for our third in a series of talks from historic figures in the pet industry. And today I've got Frank Williams from Pet Pacific in Australia, which is the largest pet product distributor in the entire country of Australia, which we really want to go and see someday. So Frank, thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the pet business?
Okay, well, early days as a teenager, a mad keen fish hobbyist, of course. After school, I did a year in an office in Sydney, and I decided that wasn't for me. So I had a cousin who had a cargo boat up in the New Guinea Islands, and I went up there and joined him up, and we went around the islands he was carrying copra to different ports, and I was out catching tropical fish.
In New Guinea?
In New Guinea.
And how old were you?
At that time, 19.
19 years old, catching fish in New Guinea. That's awesome.
It was fun. I had one native guy came with me, and we'd spend the day out there collecting and sending down to Sydney University to Professor Emmons, who was a friend of mine from my school days. He was a leading author in tropical fish books. Maybe some of your folks might know about him. He had a few famous books on fish. One, I think, How to Keep and Breed Tropical Fish, #1 book. But Professor Emmons took fish from me for a whole year.
Wow.
While I was there collecting every weekend. And
did he name one after you?
No, unfortunately not. But in doing that, I wrote some articles for TFH magazine in the States, Dr. Axelrod's magazine.
In the early 60s,
in the early 60s, would have been probably mid-60s actually.
Okay.
And he offered me a job at his fish farm in Florida, Gulf Fish Farms, which at the time was the biggest fish farm in the world.
And that was owned by Ross Sokoloff, who went into partners with Axelrod.
Originally, yes, that's right. And I think Herb Axelrod bought him out.
Oh, okay.
When I went there, and I worked there for a year breeding fish with a couple of the head breeders, which was some experience for a 19-year-old.
That's awesome.
And I learned a lot about breeding tropical fish on a commercial scale. And then I came back to Australia, and but in the time I was in the US, I had some funny things happen, and one of them that comes to mind, I was driving my old beat-up Chevrolet one night, and I ran out of fuel way out in the middle of nowhere. Pitch dark. I didn't know what to do. There was no cars, no lights even. And a car came along eventually, and a guy pulled up, and I told him the story. He took me to a gas station, and I found out that he'd been in Australia during the war and been very well looked after. So he paid for my gas, drove me back to the car, wished me well. So something came back to me there from earlier days when he was treated well in Australia, so that was nice. So from there, after that, I came back to Australia and opened a little aquarium shop at the age of 21. And
what was the name of the shop?
Reef Aquariums.
Reef Aquarium.
Hornsby.
Okay. In
New South Wales, and it's a northern suburb of Sydney.
All right.
And from there I started gradually importing a few things, and it went from a small retail business to a small wholesale business, and later to a large wholesale business. And yes, now we represent some of the leading companies both in the US and Europe, in Zoomed, of course, the most famous one of the lot, Hagen. We have Furplus in Europe, but we have a number of other, Jewel in Germany, for example, aquarium manufacturer, Red Sea.
Right.
They're all we're agents for those in Australia. So yes, so now we operate out of Sydney with a warehouse in Emu Plains, west of Sydney, and we have storage and sales teams all around the country.
That's incredible. How many warehouses do you have in Australia?
We have 3 warehouses on our main plant, main base in Sydney, and we have I think one in Melbourne, a smaller one in Melbourne, and one in South Australia and one in Brisbane.
Great, that's awesome. And how many years have you been in business in Australia doing distribution?
Distribution started probably, it'd be 45 years.
45 years, that's incredible.
From the early days.
Do you have a succession plan?
I have a 12-year-old son.
There you go.
I have a daughter who's in the 50s now that's out of the business. So whether I can wait around for my son to grow up and become the next boss, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
So you were always into pets. You weren't didn't get into rugby and become a professional rugby player?
No, at school I played rugby. In fact, I played for the state schoolboys team. So I could have gone on to try a rugby career, but the last game I played was against New Zealand. Some big Maoris pounded me into the ground. I decided that was the end of my rugby career. I didn't want any more of that.
What did you call them?
New Zealanders, Maoris. That's the local.
Oh, is that the local term?
People from New Zealand.
Oh, wow. And they're huge, probably. And
the big people, big island people.
Wow, crazy.
Tough guys.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Did you ever do live animals, at all, distribution?
Yes, we had one stage. In Australia, we have a quarantine system. You have to quarantine fish for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I did have a quarantine station in the early days. It was tough work. It's a tough business. And I decided selling merchandise was much easier.
It is. So we both had a friend in England, Freddie.
Yes.
What was Freddie's company's name?
Freddie was Pet Rex, and he also K-Jex.
K-Jex, that was it.
Name,
yeah, that's the name that I remember he used.
Freddie was an old stalwart from the early days in England, and when I met Freddie, he was old enough to be my father at the time, but he'd been around probably as long as I've been around in the pet business in Australia at that time, and amazing man. And I thought he'd live forever. When he was in his 80s, he looked like he was in his 50s, but he succumbed to cancer, unfortunately, and passed away a few years ago.
But it was amazing because when I went to England, you and Freddie went swimming.
Yeah.
And at that time, Freddie was probably in his 60s or 70s, I don't know, but he was a great swimmer. He was in good shape.
Yeah, he was in amazing shape.
Yeah.
As I say, he had great physique all his life and good health, and it's just, as I say, cancer got him in the end. So sad.
And his warehouse was quite comical. It was like a farm. He had stuff in all these outbuildings everywhere.
Right.
But it was beautiful. It was a beautiful part of England,
Oh, yeah.
And when we had a meeting, we'd go down to the local pub.
That's right.
That's where the meeting was at the pub always, with a beer.
I arrived with my colleague from New Zealand, Mike Gervais, one time, and he was a container arrived, and he had no staff to unload it, so we were given the job of unloading his container for him.
That sounds like Freddie.
Incredible. He was always looking to save $1, and did it most of the time.
Yeah, especially if you ate out with him, you were paying.
Oh, yes. I never saw him reach in his pocket in the restaurant. Fun guy, though.
Oh, gosh. So do you have any interesting stories when you were in business in Australia? Anything that happened that was probably something out of the ordinary?
Well, I started making fish tanks. So when I first came to the US...
Oh, I didn't know you made fish tanks.
Yeah, they were just starting with glass tanks in America in the mid-60s.
Right.
And I saw them in the Aquarium Stock Company in New York.
Wow.
And it surprised me because I'd always been a putty and metal frame man,
Right.
all the life. So I thought, this looks easy, 4 bits of glass, 5 bits of glass, and with silicone. So I brought some silicone back from Dow Corning and started to make fish tanks, but of course in those days they were very new, in Australia totally new, and the people that made the frame tanks were telling everybody, oh, these things fall apart after 6 months, and I didn't know if they did, so I kept making them, and even Dow Corning at the time wouldn't recommend them for fish tanks.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't recommend them, they didn't guarantee them for fish tanks, so I went on with it, however, and of course now today that's all you get is the silicone fish tanks. So it was very early days, and there was a company there, a glass company, starting to make them as well. And he actually threatened to sue me when I started my little aquarium shop and making a few tanks, and never went ahead with it. But I had some very experimental times where I'd build tanks that were far beyond the size of the glass. And I remember one time in my aquarium shop in Sydney, building a tank that was I think it was probably about 6 by 6 by 3 or something, in glass that was probably way too thin. I stood back admiring it when it was filled up with water the first day, and then heard a crunch and the whole bottom came out of it.
Oh my God.
The downstairs area, which was a car radio installation.
Oh geez.
So I was in the bad books there for a while. But we had to experiment with glass fish tanks for a long time.
The funny thing is Dow Corning put out a book on how to make aquariums.
Really?
Yeah, so probably in the beginning they were not going to guarantee it, like none of these companies want to do.
No.
But later on they put a book out. They're like, hey, you should make your own
They
aquarium.
realised themselves it worked.
It worked good, yeah.
No, they were not prepared to promise or guarantee anything in the early days.
Right.
No.
Right.
But turned out to revolutionise fish tanks, of course.
Yeah, we were talking at dinner last night about Jewel, which is the company. It's a company in Germany, because you don't want to mistake them with the Jewel Aquarium of the United States, which was the Art Deco fish tank company of the 1920s through the 1950s or whatever.
Yep.
But I thought Jewel only had robots that did their small 5 and 10 gallon, but you said they have robots that do all their tanks.
All their tanks, and up to the very big ones, 6 foot long. We've been there, and it's just amazing. These huge suction cups come down, they grab the glass, lift it up, and another arm comes down and silicons the tank.
It's just crazy.
Slapped together. The only time a human touches the tank is when they put it in a box at the end of the production line.
That is amazing.
It's an incredible thing to see. And of course, what's been able to allow them to do is to compete with the Asian manufacturers, because their labour costs have gone. which is always the disadvantage between making in Europe, Australia or America
Right.
against Asian markets. And it takes that away. So we were actually very competitive with Asian fish tanks, with our dual tanks we import.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, Germany's got high labor costs. They can't compete with China.
No.
Just to have the upfront cost of the machines, and if the machines can make the whole thing,
Once the investment's paid for you,
yeah, you're set.
way in front.
So what are the challenges in Australia running a pet business?
The same ones you probably have in America, which is high interest rates, high cost of living, fuel going up. It's lately, after COVID of course was boom times for the pet industry, because people were stuck at home and pets became a bigger thing than they were already.
Right.
After COVID, shipping went up, everything went up, and costs went up everywhere. So we had this period where we came out of COVID and things went down, and they're still on the slide a bit.
Right.
But not probably beyond where they were at the start of COVID.
Sure.
It's heading that way, heading like we might get back to the same sort of thing.
Huh.
So, we just have to allow for that. And I think the pet industry is probably no different to any other business in that regard. The ones that suffered, of course, the most in COVID were the ones that were shut, because they had no income. We at least had not only income, but better income than normal.
Right.
So we did well.
Yeah.
So we've got nothing to complain about. We even got a cheque from one of our state governments just because we were still trading in business.
Wow.
Yeah, to contribution to paying the wages, basically.
So they let you stay in business during COVID? They let you?
Yes, we were considered what they call an essential service.
Yeah, we had the same thing.
Along with pharmacies,
Sure.
hardware stores, even the liquor stores, which was surprised me, was allowed to stay open.
Well, liquor is essential if you're having stress.
If you're an alcoholic, it definitely is.
Yeah, exactly.
So we were not only allowed to trade. Of course, we did better than most because we had that stay-at-home thing, which means that pets got more attention than usual. More fish tanks went into homes, more dogs and cats were bought, and everything boomed. And it really did go on for the whole 2 years.
Wow.
Really only been sliding back in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing, the same
And
thing.
people now can travel, they can do things, spend their money on other things.
Right.
It's the thing.
Right.
So it was to be expected.
Now, I know you don't want to, I don't think you're ever going to retire, are you? You're just going to...
No, I have no reason to retire. I have fun. I enjoy what I do.
Exactly. You travel everywhere. Every show,
traveling.
we see you at every show.
Yeah, I love to travel, and I have a great team of people that work with me. I can do as little or as much as I want in the business. Absolutely no reason to want to retire. That would be crazy stuff. For me, anyway.
So, in the early days, did you have products like that were in the U.S., like Metaframe?
We started off with I don't know if some of you people will remember Biosonics.
Bisonics, yes.
Hang on, power filter.
Sure.
Which was actually purchased in the end by Hagen and became the Aquaclear, which is around today.
Really?
Yes, that was the one we early imported from. We had a problem though because we didn't know that your US when they converted the pump motors from 120 to what was supposed to be 240, but it was really 220 because they were making that for Europe.
Right.
The motor's heated, and we had a situation where the motor stuck on the outside, and it would melt the plastic, and the motor would gradually. So most of the ones we sold, we had to replace and recredit. So that wasn't a good experience, but that was one of my early imports.
Now that's true because Australia has 240, not 220.
That's right.
But your plug's different. It's not like England.
That's true.
Why didn't you guys adopt the English plug?
I'm surprised we didn't because originally we're from England, most of us.
Right.
And I don't know why they chose the plug they chose. It's not the US plug either, of course.
No.
It's a different plug. Or it's not the same as the European plug.
Right.
So I don't know where they came up with that plug. But one of the things that's been a problem for us constantly is particularly electrical products that are made for the US and European market. Obviously, the US is 110 and it has to be 110. Europe's 220.
Right.
Now they can get away with using 220 for 240. And a lot of the time you can get away with that. And of course, when the Asians in particular are making for 220, they don't want to go to 240 because it's extra cost and everything. So they tend to, if you're not careful, they'll ship us at 220. And of course what happens there is things just burn out. And so we have to be very careful. We have to insist on 240 volt, which is what England uses as well.
Right.
But of course in England the climate tends to be a bit cooler. But you get parts of Australia are very hot, and then you've got a motor that's heating up. It's
sticking to the tank.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is. It's a lesson we've learned over the years that we have to make sure we're getting 240 volt, not 220.
Right. Did you have diatom filters in the early days?
We were importing diatoms. I remember another one I imported from the US in the early days was Supreme from Danner.
Yeah,
Eugene Danner.
Eugene Danner, right? You remember him?
He had his Aqua King. We sold a lot of Aqua King.
I love that filter.
It was a great filter. Yes, he was one of my early inputs. And another one, some people may remember, Oscar Enterprises in San Francisco.
Yes.
Herb Schultz. We imported Herb's. He had a little strip, one of the strip ones that go on top of the tank. I forget the name of it now. But these were all guys that were early. But one of the funny things with Herb I'll never forget was playing golf with him. He was out on the golf course and he hit a few bad shots. There was a lake there and he hit 2 balls into the lake. When he hit the third one in, he picked up his golf bag and threw the whole lot into the lake. And then he said, "My God, my car keys are in the bag." So he had to get into the lake, wade around, find the bag, drag it back out to get his car keys. So he was Oscar Enterprises was the name of it.
I remember Oscar Enterprises.
His father was Oscar. That's where the Oscar came from.
Really?
Yeah. His father was still alive back then. He was quite elderly, of course. But Oscar Enterprises, San Francisco, one of my early imports.
Did you bring in Penplex ornaments?
Yes.
You did?
Oh, yes.
You did well with those?
Yeah. Well, we did Penplex, not in the early days. Hagen had a range of ornaments like Penplex, accent ornaments. But Penplex were with another company that sort of rolled over along the way, and we inherited Penplex.
Do you have any creatures from the Black Lagoon, like in the back room, sitting there waiting for me to have you ship them to
museum?
me? Yeah, for the museum.
I don't think I was buying from them when I remember the creature from the Black Lagoon, but I don't think I have anything like that because I wasn't importing back that far, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty far back. Yeah.
There were some old classics with Hagen. I remember they had a Stingray that used to go up and down, and
oh yes,
there was a number of ones.
Those were great.
That I had in the early days. But yeah, I think over the years the business, as you know, has evolved and changed, and you've had to be flexible, move along with it.
Exactly.
One of our most rewarding and satisfying agencies has been Zoomed, of course. We appreciate what you've done for us.
Yeah, you've done well with us. We've had a great partnership. We really have.
We have, and it's been down to you and your team and my team as well.
Yeah.
Being caring enough about reptiles to make everything work right.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the thing.
I told you my funny story last night about Australia is when I went to Japan, I met a guy who spoke English, a Japanese guy who spoke perfect English with an Australian accent. And I'm like, how did you learn how to speak English like that? And he goes, oh, I was smuggling reptiles out of Australia, and they put me in jail in the middle of the country with all these Aussies. And then I learned how to speak English, you know? And he said there was no walls or anything because you're in the middle of Australia. They're not afraid you're going to run away.
Yeah.
You'll burn up in the desert.
Yeah.
But he goes, it was so wonderful. I got to collect animals, keep them in my jail cell.
You learned from jail.
Yeah.
To speak English. Amazing. Well, being in the middle of the country, he probably had plenty of time to think about these things. And
He didn't learn, though. I think he went back and got caught again.
yeah. Well, you know what they say about birds, teaching a bird to talk, the best thing to do is put it under your kitchen table and put a cloth over it so it can't see anything, and just let it hear your voices. They're saying that's the best way to get a bird to talk.
Really? Really?
Keep them in the dark, let them hear the voices, but not be able to see or concentrate on anything other than the sound.
Then hearing it. Huh. Did you ever keep birds yourself?
No, I've always wanted a morcor, but I've had a wife that doesn't like noisy birds. that ruled out the morcor. So, no, I've never had birds. I've had everything: cats, dogs, fish, of course, and small animals, but not birds.
All right. Well, any last thoughts, Frank?
No, all except to say, we love coming to SuperZoo and Global in Florida every year. Always bring a team with us, and we, often find new and exciting products. That's the idea of coming. But it's also to renew relationships with people like yourself and your people.
Yeah, exactly.
So that we see you and we get to bounce ideas off one another, and that always makes it worthwhile, even if nothing comes in the way of product.
Yeah, that's true.
We have enough to keep going with products as it is, so we're not desperate for anything new.
Well, it's also wonderful breaking bread with you last night at dinner. That was great, getting to catch up there.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thank you for that. So having a social part of the relationship is also very important.
It is very important. All right. Well, thank you so much, Frank.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for your
coming.
time and for your looking after us at Pet Pacific. We appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.